For folks that are new to the annuity business, I get the question all the time is what is a market value adjustment? Now, most of us know what surrender charges are and what surrender charges are for. And before I talk about the market value adjustment, I want to re-explore the surrender charge thing. So when a carrier puts a policy on the books, that carrier has a certain amount of strain, a certain amount of capital that's required to put that policy on the books, right? Because, the carrier going through the process of issuing policies, that costs money. Yes, there are commission charges to the agents, but there are also additional acquisition costs, right? Now, as the policy goes through its life, that policy is eventually going to get into profitability for that carrier. And the actual return that the carrier gets on that policy, what they paid to put that policy on the books, plus what their income was from their investments, the general account investments over time, well, that's their internal rate of return for that particular policy, right? And what carriers require as far as IRRs, it varies depending on the carrier, right? Some carriers may ask for 8%. Probably the more common that carriers ask for is 10, 11, 12% internal rate of return on each of those policies. Now, my point with surrender charges before talking about the market value adjustment is if a policy is canceled, is surrendered, say, a year into the policy. Without surrender charges, that carrier would have lost money on that policy, right? So that carrier needs to apply surrender charges to offset those acquisition charges. But that's not all. What else is there? You see, when a carrier invests the consumer's money, that carrier goes out and buys a bond to basically match the duration. I'm talking about the annuity side, not the life side. Annuity side is usually priced as new money products, right? Meaning today's interest rates, I'm going to go out, I have $100,000 coming in from the client, I'm going to go out and I'm going to buy a $100,000 bond. It's not really that micro, but just bear with me here because it's big blocks of business and big blocks of bonds that the carriers buy. Now, we all know that when interest rates increase, let's say between now and a year from now, when the client chooses to surrender that policy, should that client choose to surrender that policy. Yes, you have the part that's taken care of by the surrender charges, the acquisition charges that the carrier had, all of that good stuff, right? But how does the carrier, who then is going to take a loss on that bond, how does the carrier offset that loss on the bond? Because we all know that when that carrier has to sell the bond to get the money back to the client, that if interest rates have increased, that bond is not going to give the carrier maybe what that carrier paid for that bond, right? That is where the market value adjustment calculation comes in. That is where the market value adjustment in the case of rising interest rates between the point of issue to the point the client surrenders, that's where that client may effectively have an additional surrender charge to offset that loss that the carrier has. The inverse is true. If interest rates decrease, maybe that client has a positive market value adjustment that washes away some of the surrender charges, which actually has happened quite frequently over the last 5-year period of time or so. And it is no coincidence, by the way, that if you know finance and how the value of bonds are calculated as basically the present value of future coupon payments, the present value of what the bondholder gets back at maturity. It is no coincidence that if you've ever looked at the market value adjustment calculation, which looks like rocket science, it is the same as the bond evaluation calculation that maybe the folks on Wall Street may play with when they look at bond values, right? That is what a market value adjustment is basically passing through the gain or the loss that the carrier has by liquidating those bonds. And although I'm talking micro, $100,000 at a time, obviously that's not how carriers do it. But it is the gain or the loss pass through that carriers give to consumers on the gains or losses on those bonds. That's market value adjustment. And that's also a little on surrender charges.